and stand up for your values and talk about them, we're doomed. Jonathan Halevi, and I'll say more about him before he speaks, is the most politically incorrect, responsible incorrect that I've ever met until I heard Tom Keegan on Monday night and their colleagues. So we have a treat. While we're waiting for Jonathan to come with his computer, I want you to meet Tom Keegan, and he'll give you an earful of political correctness and where it leads us.
Hi, thank you. A few of you might know me. I've done a fair bit of work with Danny Eisen in the past on some CCAT projects on the Justice for the Victims of Terrorism Act, and I've been working with CCAT and a few others for the last few years. Okay, is that better? All right. Few of you might know me. I worked with Danny Eisen quite a bit with CCAT, Canadian Coalition Against Terror, and I was helping him and a few others get the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act passed. Okay, Justice for the Victims of Terrorism Act was passed after 9/11 by two victims of terrorism, Danny Eisen and Maureen Vazniki, both of whom lost close relatives in that attack. It allows Canadian citizens to sue institutions and individuals if they have money, and if those institutions have been using that money to fund terrorism. The act has been passed about 2.5 years ago, something like that. It's been used once already by some folks who sued the government of Iran. Iran lost the case, and they lost a bunch of money, which the Iranian government had left in bank accounts after they got kicked out of Canada by the government back in September 2012. So that was kind of a very interesting development and a huge blow against Iran, which they still haven't quite got over. Since then, I've done a lot of work on the Muslim Brotherhood in Canada, the Ahmadiyas in Canada, Hizb ut-Tahrir in Canada, and the Wahhabis, who don't have a strong institutional presence but have a huge financial presence. One of the things I've noticed the most over the last 2 years is the Voldemort effect, for those of you that have ever read Harry Potter. Harry Potter had a problem in that nobody was allowed to talk about he who could not be named. Nobody was allowed to talk about Voldemort. It was so scary you couldn't even mention it. And we've got the same problem here in Canada now, and US and in much of Western Europe. We have become so postmodernist, cultural relativist, fourth wave feminist, and politically correct that you can't say anything now without the fear of offending somebody. And if somebody is offended, you're not allowed to say this. So of course, if you're operating in those circles, the quickest way to shut down a conversation is just to go, "You're a racist." And then everybody else has to be quiet. No one's allowed to speak. So one of the things I mentioned on Monday night is a very recent example of political correctness in Canada. On the 19th of February, CBC English and La Presse, which is a French daily newspaper in Quebec, both put out articles on Maisonneuve College in Montreal. It's a CEGEP, sort of like Algonquin College, whatever, that sort of thing. The CBC article said that the union representing the teaching staff had filed a complaint with the management and said they were upset with the way the students were behaving. The article then goes on to say the students were making too much noise in the library, they were making rude gestures at the staff, and then it makes a reference to there was like some sort of fight out in the parking lot that occurred because of all this, and the police had to show up. And then they interviewed the public relations person for the college who said, well, you know, it's mainly a noise problem. So if you read that CBC story, you would be left with the impression there's a bunch of rude students at Maisonneuve College who are misbehaving, and when the staff told them to shut up and be quiet in the library, then some sort of fight broke out. That's what you get from the CBC story. What you really want to do is read La Presse, because the Quebec press isn't quite so politically correct as the rest of us, and they have anti-slap laws in Quebec, so it's much easier to actually speak out. When you read La Presse, what it says is 5 students from Maisonneuve College have gone to fight for ISIS. 4 more students from ISIS tried to go fight for ISIS, but got caught at the Montreal airport and got turned around. 2 students from Maisonneuve College are in jail because they had a pressure cooker, the chemicals and the nails and stuff, and the directions on how to make a pressure cook bomb. And what they actually had in their material was something that said, it's all ready to go, we're just waiting for the message. So these are the students at Mason College. Now, one of these students who tried to go to ISIS but got caught at the airport and sent back is the guy leading the problems at Mason College. Him and a bunch of his buddies have taken over the library, they've taken over the gymnasium, and they refuse to let anybody else in there. And as other students try and use that space, what they find is they're not allowed to, and it's resulted in violence. There's been a stabbing in the parking lot. The staff are afraid because they're having their cars photographed, their license plate numbers written down, they're followed home and stuff like that. So it's increasingly an element of fear brought to you by students who support ISIS. So you kind of look at it and say, how is it that CBC can write a story that says, you know, it's about noise and it's about rude students who aren't being nice to the professors, but yet La Presse can write a story that says these are ISIS students who are trying to take over part of the college. And I think that's a fairly good example of what I would call political correctness gone mad. Now, if you look at CBC, and I'm not going to pick on CBC totally because there's lots of others doing it, but because they're the national broadcaster, maybe they should be held to a higher standard. But when you look at CBC and you say, well, what's wrong with you guys? Why can't you publish this sort of stuff? And I've talked to CBC reporters and they say, well, there's a couple of things. One, litigation fear. They're afraid of being sued. But I mean, hey, they've got the taxpayers' budget. They, of all people, should not be afraid of being sued. The other thing is CBC, the head of news a while ago, tried to say, well, we have a policy that we've had for a long time that we don't do anything or report anything that's offensive to religion. And I kind of look at it and say, you have absolutely no problem with going after Christian groups. You had no problem at all putting up a story on Piss Christ, which was the crucifix stored in urine, which is called to be a work of art, which was highly offensive to a bunch of Christians. You have absolutely no problem whatsoever going after Jews. It's open season as far as that goes. So why is it the rule on you can't offend religion only applies to Muslims? And as a matter of fact, it only applies to extremist Muslims. Why is that? And then you get it's difficult. It's difficult. It's political correctness is what it is. So that's just kind of a quick example of some of the stuff that's going on right here in Canada. I'll give you one other quick example. In 2012, in December, in Montreal, a guy by the name of TIKVAH tried to kidnap the 3-year-old grandson of a Montreal Jewish billionaire. Now, TIKVAH is an interesting guy. He works for the Muslim Association of Canada, which is a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood. He's head of their education program, which runs 20 schools in Canada, and he was in charge of the funding project for the new Muslim Association of Canada Centre, which they were buying in Montreal. In fact, they bought the old SNC Lavalin building downtown. So, it turns out that the project for fundraising isn't going too well. They're on the hook for the building because they've agreed to buy it, now they don't have the funding. Strangely enough, just at that time, TIKVAH tries to kidnap this 3-year-old kid. Now, here's the interesting part. I followed up on this with a couple of other folks about a year later when he was going to trial, and suddenly realized and said, hey look, everything he did ties into the timeline for the funding of this new project. He wasn't kidnapping this kid for himself. He wasn't going to pocket that money himself. He was going to use a few $1 million to help support the Muslim Association of Canada New Centre. I gave all this information to journalists in English and in French, and in Montreal, Le Journal de Montréal, which is owned by Pierre-Marc Caladot, whatever, the guy who's now head of the Parti TIKVAH, he owns all that. He actually put a couple of journalists on it, and they did a 5-page story in the Journal de Montréal about the kidnapping, about where the money was going from, about the Muslim Brotherhood, about the Muslim Association of Canada, everything. When they gave it to the English media, nothing. It took several months before they finally put out a half-page story. So here you have a foreign-based extremist group operating in Canada through a series of fronts that tried to kidnap the 3-year-old son of a billionaire for profit to help build their center, and the media won't report on it in English, but they will in French. So if you wonder sometimes and go back why things seem a little different, well, things are a little different. You can actually speak out a bit more and go back on most issues. So that's kind of a quick look at some political correctness. The other form of political correctness, which kind of gets me, is feminist, especially 3rd and 4th wave feminists, which probably makes up most of them now. Here in Canada, or here in Ontario specifically, we have the highest rate of forced suicides for young Asian women of probably anywhere in the world, which is pretty staggering to think about what life's like in India India, and Pakistan. And these are young girls, typically teenagers, who are forced to commit suicide by their families, typically by drinking morphine, the blood thinner, which is also a rat poison. So you buy rat poison at Canadian Tire or whatever, and they're forced to drink that because they're harassed and abused by their own family. So here's the interesting thing I found. When I talk to police forces, because I'm ex-military and ex-intelligence, and I worked for the RCMP for about 6 years, so when I talk to police forces and I ask them, like, what are you guys doing about this? They say, hey, look, we're trying to get into the communities, we're trying to get out there, but we meet the sort of ethnic wall that we can't break, and then we meet the wall of silence, because even those people in the South Asian community who want to speak out are afraid to, because if they know where if they're found out, they'll be in trouble themselves. So typically the best person to go to in a case like that would be the older sister. But the older sisters know that if they get caught talking to the police and the intelligence services, they'll wind up dead as well. So I talk to the police and say, well, is it getting better? And they say, well, it's getting better. The police get support from their frontline supervisors and from their senior staff. So most of senior staff at Peel Regional, Toronto Police, whatever, are typically white Anglo-Saxon males still. And they're willing to support this, and they're willing to get the money and put the effort into it. Where it fails is when the police departments go to the politicians and say, we need community and political support to make this work. The police can't solve this problem. The police aren't social workers, and they're not social engineers. They can identify the problem, but they can't fix it. And as soon as that happens, it dies on the table. Nothing happens because the politicians wouldn't touch this with the table.
You mean Pakistani or?
South Asian, typically Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indians.
Muslims.
Oh yeah, well, almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively Muslim, yeah. The biggest single problem right now, and we saw it with the events in Cologne and Stockholm and a few others, is that there is a huge struggle within Islam itself right now for the soul of Islam. Some people are rationalists and modernists, and they want to drive Islam ahead into the future. Unfortunately, most of the folks who you hear about most of the time are literalists, Salafists, and they want to drive Islam back to the year, 680, 700, whatever, pick a date. Right now, literally around the world, that struggle goes on, whether it's Pakistan, where it's really bad, parts of India, where it's getting worse, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tunisia, Algeria, Somalia, Sudan, etc., etc. I mean, the extreme radical forces are in ascendance and they're winning at the moment. So with that, you get this incredibly misogynistic view of women. After the events in Cologne, I don't know how many people paid attention to that in Cologne, Germany on New Year's Eve, there was a bunch of women beaten, robbed, raped, attacked, whatever, in an organized manner. And there have been 1,075 criminal complaints filed and about 58 guys arrested. The problem there is, for instance, the Imam of Cologne was asked afterwards, what was your view? What do you think happened? When he was talking to Russian TV, to RT, which is based outside of Russia, but whatever, he actually said, well, there was women running around scantily dressed, they were wearing perfume, so when they walk through a mob of drunken men, that's what happens. So, now this is where it gets interesting. He is re-interviewed by Express, which is a British paper, and they went to him and said, wow, did you actually say this? And he says, well, that's not what I really meant. What I meant was, there was a bunch of women wearing perfume, and they were scantily dressed. They walked through a crowd of drunken men, and some North Africans feel it's okay to do something at that point. I don't actually condone it, but that's what happens. So he's then interviewed again by Deutsche Welle, which is a big German mainstream press, and he comes up with basically the same comment, saying, he doesn't approve of it, but this is what happens. So the message from the sort of Salafistic or the literalist Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Romanians, all those groups, is when something happens to the woman, it's her fault. Here in Canada, you would think, especially here in Ontario, just picking one province at random, you would think that feminists would have a somewhat different point of view on this. But the reality is the political practice is so tough here in Ontario that Kathleen Wynne, a gay, female, liberal premier, when she went to the Autumn Mosque, she sat at the back, in the back wearing hijab. And I thought, I'm from Ontario, my premier sits at the front of the room. But anyway, nonetheless, this is what's going on. Here in Toronto, for instance, There's a number of schools which are Toronto District School Boards, public taxpayer schools. We're not talking parochial schools, private schools, anything like that. These are public schools where they have Friday prayer in the school. The boys sit at the front, the girls sit at the back, and the unclean girls have to sit outside. They're not allowed in the room. And this is going on in taxpayers.
What do you mean on?
Menstruating. Literally, so they have to self-identify, and they're literally not allowed in the room. And this is going on in taxpayer-funded public schools. So the one message you get from the province of Ontario is girls are important, girls are the future. Because I'm a girl, you know, the future's mine and all this stuff. What you're actually getting in the schools, however, is because you're a girl, you can sit at the back of the room, and matter of fact, you can sit outside the room, and you're not allowed to lead the prayer service because, well, you're a girl. So you'd kind of think the feminists would be all over this, saying, you know, why are women being forced to sit at the back of the room in taxpayer-funded public spaces? And the reality is, it's absolute silence. You won't hear a word out of, what's her name, Sheila Copps from Hamilton. Who's the woman that wrote all the books, Handmaid's Tale and all that?
Atwood.
Margaret Atwood, yeah, you would think, if anything, she's got the money, the power, and the influence to hammer these folks. And what you get is absolutely stunning silence. Another interesting example of political correctness at universities is York University. Former student, 89, 90, long time ago. York University has a Muslim Student Association like 300 some other universities in Canada. Muslim Awareness Week last year, which was February 2015, they actually handed out a book called Women in Islam, Some Common Misperceptions. You would think with a title like that, it would be kind of like pro-female or at least balanced, or, you know, women have an important role to play in the family or something like that. There's actually a chapter in there called Wife Disciplining, and I'm not making this up. I've got pictures of it, you can look it up on my site, you can look it up on the net. In this chapter, they talk about the 3-stage correctional process you apply to your wife when she's misbehaving. So the first thing you do is you identify to her that you're misbehaving. Excuse me, ma'am, you're misbehaving. Then, you explain to her how she should properly behave. And then when that doesn't work, you beat the crap out of her. I'm not making this up. It's a 3-stage correctional process. Now, even more interestingly, it says there's different kinds of women out there who will react differently. Some are a little more aggressive, some are a little more subdued. Subdued women, or submissive women, will enjoy the beating because it's a sign of love and concern for them. So, York University allows books to be handed out that say you can beat your wife because she likes it. I can't think, and I come from a bit of a redneck background, some of my friends are a little whatever, and I still drive a motorcycle and stuff like that. I can't think I've heard anything like that come out of rednecks since about the 1970s. Let alone hearing this in polite company, let alone hearing it at universities where it's being handed out. That same book is the one that's handed out in Dundas Square. It's the same book that's handed out as the Islamic Walk-In Center. The book, incidentally, is published in Saudi Arabia. There's a shock. And it's funded by WAMI, the World Association of Muslim Youth, which is half owned by the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Student Association is bringing in Saudi-published books using Saudi money to spread the message that beating your wife is okay because she actually likes it. Now, before we just pick on the Muslim Student Association, we should look at Jamal Badawi in Halifax. He has a website, again, talks about the 3-stage correctional process and how to beat your wife. Iman Amer in Montreal actually goes out of his way to say that the Western concept of beating your wife as a criminal activity is wrong. So, in fairness to the Imam, he would actually say if I just walked into the street and beat the crap out of some woman going by, he would agree that's wrong. But beating your wife is okay, because when you're beating your wife, it's actually a form of education. It's not a form of violence or criminal activity. So beating your wife is okay because it's a form of education when it occurs within the context of Islam. So, if you look at Montreal, we find the exact same thing coming out of some other imams. Mississauga Halal Food Fest, handing out a book saying, guess what, it's okay to beat your wife, and she has to stay home, and you don't have to hire a maid because your wife has to stay home and do all the work, and she's not allowed to leave the house. If you go to Winnipeg, same thing. You go to Calgary, we've got Imam Hissi, I forget his name anyway. He's wanted in the U.S. on sexual assault charges, stunningly enough. And he actually says that women should quit feminism out of their life because it has nothing to offer them. And he also says you should choose Allah or you should choose Canada, but you can't choose both. So these are the kinds of things that are coming out regularly. It's coming out right across Canada. It's in the schools, it's in the universities, it's in the government, and yet we find absolutely no response from our politicians or from our so-called academic leaders. So anyway, why I would say political correctness is the greatest threat? Yeah.
I just have a quick question. On Monday, you had an amazing slide presentation. Wanted to know if you could give that to anyone.
Yes, yeah.
Just to update you, at the start they decided to no longer say the word ISIS or ISIS, they're calling it Daesh.
Jonathan's here, yes. Very quick comment on that. I noticed what they went to for support was the National Council of Canadian Muslims, formerly known as CARCAN, which is a front set up for Hamas. So not too startling, but yeah, that is again political correctness comment. Was it CBC or the Toronto Star that won't allow comments on stories anymore? I think it's the Toronto Star. They used to be, the public would go into the comment section. Well, they quit doing that because they found that offensive. Jonathan, get up here.
In your speech, you don't mention democracy. And democracy is one of the major problems where these people have a vote and they don't want to lose their vote to politicians, so they essentially say nothing, because by saying something, they're not going to get the support of the people who are against it.
There's a question there that gets raised regularly. Yes. What about politicians? Are they afraid to speak out because they don't want to offend anybody? And that applies to all political parties right across the spectrum. Just for fun, Imam Rizvi, before we turn over to Jonathan, Imam Rizvi up at 9,000 Bathurst at the Jafari Mosque, we have a recording of a sermon he gave inside the mosque, which is a federal charity, by the way, saying that there is no difference between the political parties. The NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives are all controlled by Israel, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, interesting thought. That's a real problem, however, is they know where the money is and they know that votes are contained within certain ridings where a move of 3 or 5% can change the outcome in a riding, so that's kind of an issue. Where do they get the money? The money comes from Saudi Arabia. The money comes from a large number of charities, so in other words, you're paying for it. Most of these outfits I've talked about all run charities, which are federally sponsored charities, so the taxpayers subsidizing this, and a lot of the money is directly given to them by the government. The money coming from Saudi Arabia is typically Wahhabi money or Muslim Brotherhood money, one or the other. ISNA's high school in Mississauga, the first few $1 million that went into that was Wahhabi money. All the Somali mosques in Ottawa have an Arab imam, Wahhabi money.
What's your website?
I work under the name TSEC, Terrorism and Security Experts of Canada, TSEC, so if you look for that, you should find it. Question just came up.
Repeat the question, and then we're at the last question now.
Question just.
We're ready to start, so would you repeat Max's question? I recognize you.
Okay, question just come up, and essentially the question is, why don't Muslims have a voice that's heard in public? Why aren't they heard? And the answer is, for instance, Rahil Reza, and part of her, she has a coalition of a number of Muslim organizations called Muslims Facing Tomorrow, actually put out a statement saying immigration from Muslim states like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria should be stopped until the government gets its Screening Act straightened out. I don't think any of you probably heard that. Donald Trump said it, the whole world hears it. Muslims, when they speak out on this issue, run into the same political correctness problem, that they have a very hard time getting a voice, because when they speak out against extremists, the press and the government won't touch it. When the extremist groups out in Canada speak out, like NCCM, IRFAN, on all these ISNA, ICNA, then they get the coverage. Anyway, here.
Tom, thank you so much. That was a double treat and a double dose of political incorrectness. Actually, it's too serious to joke about, although you do a good job of joking. Let me tell you about Jonathan. Your name. He was in the IDF in intelligence. He was a lieutenant colonel. He serves now, even now, as senior analyst of the Middle East and radical Islam at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, which is headed by the former ambassador Dory Gold. He was a former advisor to the Policy Planning Division of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a special consultant to the Terror Victims Litigation Project, which represents U.S. citizens harmed by terrorist actions in the Middle East, and a co-founder of the Orient Research Group, a strategic and private information group. In 2014, Yoni founded the Canadian Centre for Intelligence and Analysis, an independent, and this is very important, independent, not under anybody's thumb, not under anybody's, pulling anybody's strings, nonpartisan research organization based on systematically monitoring a myriad of media channels. And when I say myriad, I mean it because not only, of course, he's fluent in Hebrew and English, but he's fluent in Arabic. He has a working knowledge of Farsi. He even knows Urdu. He makes it his business to check out what they are saying, never mind what we say about them in our heavily oblivious newspapers, but what they say themselves in their own languages. In December of 2014, he was summoned to testify before the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in the House of Commons on the threat of the Islamic State to Canada and the West. And you'll hear more about that tonight, of course. He was invited to Ottawa, London, and Washington to brief MPs and congressmen on UNRWA's ties with Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists, which I'm sure you're aware of, the UNRWA funding of people who are working for Hamas. He's a contributor to many media that will, unfortunately, Ezra Levant is no longer on the air, but those that want to know what's really going on and what's really happening will call on Jonathan Halevi. And tonight, we have a good fortune of hearing him and hearing from the source, the sources that you'll never hear anywhere else. So, he had to run home and get his computer, that's why he's a little bit late. Welcome, Jonathan Halevi. I also forgot to mention he has started his own online newspaper, CanadaIsraelJewishNews.com. CIJnews.com. Make a note of it.
Before I start, I'd like to give a little brochure, about 5 pages, that's all. And you can find inside it, it's called Say No to Islamophobia. Educate yourself about the teachings of Islam as being taught by senior Canadian imams and Islamic books which are sold in bookstores or distributed for free by leading Islamic organizations in Canada. So you can have a glimpse to read about that. It's not today, but I just, it was compiled last week, yes. You can have some taste of what is being taught in mosques. And I'm going to talk about that maybe later. And to give you a full description of what is going on. So we are going to talk tonight about the threat of ISIS to Canada and the West. The Islamic State was established almost 2 years ago, 2014 in Syria and Iraq. The capital is Raqqa, and it's stretched to the eastern part of Iraq, which is, we are talking about Caliphate, Islamic State, with the Caliph. The Caliph is meaningful. The Caliph is not just a president or a king who represent the people in his area, but he is the supreme authority for all Muslims worldwide. That's the way that he sees himself. That's the word Caliph. Those who believe in or accept the authority of the Caliph, they have under his authority with regard to everything, which means that can be, he is responsible for example, for declaring the jihad. And if someone here from Canada pledge allegiance, swear allegiance to the Caliph, he must obey his teachings. So the Caliph is very important. It's not just a head of state. He's a spiritual leader, and he is also the political leader of all Muslims worldwide. And that's also the way that the way that he speaks to Muslims. He does not speak only to Muslims in Syria and Iraq, not only to his supporters. I give you some examples. Just in his latest speech, his name is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He called upon all Muslims worldwide to help and support the Islamic State because of the attacks of the international coalition in Iraq. This is the battle of all unbelievers against all Muslims. Every Muslim involved in the war. This is the war of every Muslim. And not only that,
excuse me, what is the difference between ISIS and ISIL?
there's no difference at all. This is the same name.
Why are they saying
Perfect. Thank you. So the ICE, when you talk about the L is Levant. In Arabic, this is Asham, the area of Asham. The area of Asham is not just Syria. It's Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and co-Palestine. This is one area. So that's why it's the ISIL, the Levant. But it's much simpler to say Syria, ISIS. Anyway, you can see here his instructions, the instruction of the Caliph. Prepare yourself to your war everywhere. None will be excused. And in other message, we know from investigation that it's not only Muslim worldwide, it's also Muslim in Canada. And for the investigation in Switzerland, Toronto was mentioned as one of the targets. But it's not only the investigation, the information that you can get from the security services. You see that they are very clear in the messages that they are conveying to the Muslim Canadians. And they call them Muwahidun, which is the Muslim who believe in one God, in the oneness of God. And they call them that they have to take action. You must strike the soldiers, patrons, the troops of the Tawaghi, the tyrants. And the same message came also conveyed by ISIS spokesperson, and he mentioned specifically Canadians and how to do that. Kill them in any manner possible. If you look at what's happening today in Israel, you would see correlation between the instructions and how it's being translated. And you see the impact of ISIS on what's happening in the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Israel. Here another message from another commander, and he said that all countries who took part in the campaign, military campaign against ISIS, are targets, are legitimate targets by ISIS, which means by all Muslims worldwide. And the objective, and their goal is very simple. The goal is Rome, the Vatican. The main enemy is not Israel, of course. Israel is just one station, in the long journey. But the main issue is Christians, to break the cross, to take over Rome, and to defeat Christianity. And this is for them, it's the main issue. Even though the Christians are the people of the book, and others like the Hindus and the Chinese, for example, do not believe in one God. But for them, according to the traditions, the Jews and the Christians are prime target. And according to the prophecy of Muhammad, in order to bring the Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah, 3 cities must be liberated. One is Istanbul, the second one is Jerusalem, and the third one is Rome. We will conquer your Rome, break your crosses. Exactly what I'm saying about Christianity as an enemy, and enslave your women. I just watched yesterday, Ezra Levant. He interviewed one of the bodyguards in Cologne, and he said to him that when he tried to help some women who were attacked by Muslims, one of the attackers told him, "She is my wife," and that's in one sentence. It brings the whole idea of the perception of women, of the infidel women in Islam. So they are part of the spoils of war. And we see that, unfortunately, with the Yazidis, with Christians in Iraq. So here the instructions are simple. Calling Canadians to kill the disbeliever. The blood and wealth is legal. There is no, everything is open season, basically what he's saying. His blood is like the blood of a dog. Smash his head with a rock. Slaughter him with a knife. Run him over with your car. Throw him down from a high place. Choke possibly. This is exactly, you see, the same tactics being used by Palestinians in the West Bank. The knife attacks, the knife intifada, and it's also targeting. Yes.
Excuse me. You have to swallow the mic and speak slowly.
I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry. So these are the instructions, and when we're talking about the threat of ISIS, you can see how the threat look like. So we know exactly what ISIS is. We saw all the pictures, the videos, throwing people from rooftops, beheadings, everything. Here it's being translated into a very concrete direction to Muslim Canadians to take actions. So how many people joined ISIS? And this is what Michel Colombe, the CISIS director, said. 180 Canadians engaged with terrorist organization abroad. 180. 100 in Iraq and Syria. And 60 have returned to Canada. So I can say that they are Canadians. Canadian is Canadians. Also those who went to ISIS are coming back and pledge allegiance to the Caliph, which means they are under his full authority. They are still Canadians. So that's only the number of people who went to the fields of jihad. I don't know if you know, but 4 Canadians carried out suicide attacks during recent years. 2 in Algeria, 1 in Syria, and 1 in Iraq. In Syria, he was a student from Montreal, blew himself up with booby truck full of explosive, I think 1.6 ton of explosive in Damascus. The second one, a similar truck in Iraq, and the 2 others, if you remember, in and the gas plant in Algeria. Both of them carried out suicide bombing attacks. And if I remember correctly, 16 of the ISIS operatives, or those who were affiliated with ISIS or with Al-Qaeda, were converts. If you compare it to the numbers that existed in ISIS's report in 2004, you can see that there is the number is rising from 130 to 180. But there's only who went there. There are also others who are, according to CISIS, here in Canada, supporting, debating, etc. But what is important here, those who went to Iraq and Syria, they are not looking for a job. They want to join or they already joined the fight in the ranks of ISIS, which means a day before they took the plan, they can do it here, to other infidels. Many targets are here in Canada. There's no difference between the war against the infidels in Iraq and Syria and the war here in Canada. So the potential is also here by hundreds. So the threat is real. So how the Canadian government understand the threat of ISIS? The enslavement of women, the mass killing, genocide, etc. So that's what the Defense Minister, Sajjan, has said. That was a day before the ISIS attack in Paris. In his interview to CBC, and he said, ISIS is a threat, but we should not fear ISIS. We can be calm about ISIS. In recent statement, he referred to ISIS as a criminal enterprise, not as a terrorist organization, but a veneer of religious veneer that added to the criminal organization. John McCallum, Immigration Minister, here, I think it's a very important statement. He said, that was last week, that and it's all connected all together, that the phrase barbaric cultural practices that refer to the book Discover Canada, that immigrants have to study before the test, is too heavy, too strong. So, and he referred exactly to honor killing, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, or gender-based violence, which is all the things that we know that exist in the land of ISIS, that it's too strong. The word barbaric is unfit here. We should use another word, maybe criminal, maybe just cultural practices. So, what Justin Trudeau is saying about ISIS, I think that is very important because this is the directive that the government is espousing. And first of all, he said that he was asked a very clear question by Global News, and he said, and his answer was that Canada will not change its strategy, even if ISIS attacks in Canada, on its soil. And he explained why. And this is a quote, direct quote of what he said. That if we respond, that may create walls in the society. He means that between what he means that we should, yes.
Yes. Regarding this item, I would like to point out there is 180 degrees different what Trudeau said and behaved before he became Prime Minister. When he was head of the opposition party, then there was some intruder that came into his house, right? And very diplomatically he asked the RCMP to protect his house, right? Because at that time they did not, okay? And yet, when our global house as Canadians, he says we shouldn't protect ourselves, we shouldn't be afraid, but when it comes to his personal family, then he wants protection.
In this case, I'm not talking about his protection or his protection of the family, but his concept, how he understands the threat of ISIS, how he understands ISIS in general. In general. So let's go back to, I want to, just a minute, to show you a video, short video. He's basically saying that anything that is maybe related to the Muslim community, which means the action that taken by the government in war terror that will refer to the Muslim community, may create wars, tension, etc. And we should not do that. That's exactly what ISIS wants us to do. And that's why he does not intend, he has no intention to react if ISIS attacks Canada. So these are the, I would say, the DNA of Trudeau's understanding of ISIS. And not of ISIS, sorry, of Islam, and also radical Islam, what they call political Islam. And in two occasions, in two interviews to CBC, he said that Islam is not incompatible with Western secular democracy, a free place like Canada. So there's no contradiction with the concept of Islam and with the values of Canada. And in the second interview he said that we should demonstrate that Islam is not incompatible with free and open Western societies. So the objective of the government is to promote this idea in society in order not to create walls between segments of the society and to persuade Canadians that Islam is compatible with the West. There's no problem. So also, in his statement, he made a connection between the values of Islam and the values of Canada. And he said that the principles upon the values of Ramadan are the principles upon which Canada is founded, and the tenets of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And also interesting to read what he said to the newspaper in Surrey, British Columbia, before he was elected. And he said that his lesson from the 9/11 attacks is that we should convey a strong message that separating Islam as a Muslim from the terrorist. So each time he said that, each time there is terrorist attack, we should separate the Muslim from the terrorist. So that exactly goes in line with what he said about Islam is compatible with the secular values. And then if something else may challenge this concept, we should always go to this assertion. So, why I'm dealing with this issue? Because if you want to understand what drives Canadians to join the jihad, to join ISIS, from where it comes, only from just watching videos, so people see beheadings and sympathizing with ISIS and want to join the beheadings. They want some sabaya, the slave girls, maybe, I don't know, but from where it comes, we should look into the sources, into the roots of the problem. And the question is, does ISIS represent Islam? Or ISIS is just Khawarij? They're not part of Islam. They're exception. We know exactly what the foundations of ISIS, which means the Caliphate, the Islamic State, correct? The jihad against the infidels. We want to take Rome, okay? They said that. Slave girls, Sabaya. Beheadings, stoning the adulterers, we can see the pictures, homosexuals, and as you see here, chopping off hands of thieves. That's almost, on a daily basis. In Syria and Iraq, it's done. But by the way, the picture here is very graphic. But other pictures are even more graphic, not because of the act itself of chopping the hands, but you can see how it's done in the main square of the city, and you can see hundreds of people gathering, and the first lines are children. So each time that I watch that scene, I always look at the action is not important, but to see the faces of the young boys, there's no girls of course, just men, just males, to see the people, the young boys looking into the scene and what happens to them. That's a new generation is being shaped in Syria and Iraq. It's a new generation of murderers. The last one was, I think, 3 years old, if you saw it on TV. Have you seen that? Yes, yes, he pushed the button and killed 3 people by remote control who were kept in a car, and he put a trapped car. A 3-year-old and then went to see the results of the explosion. So they educate. It's not just him. You can see it in the madrasas, in the mosques. Unfortunately, I don't have the video here, but one of the recent videos is really shocking. They did a game with the, I think, 12, 13-year-old boys. They all joined the summer camp in Iraq. And those who excelled in the missions were chosen, I think, 4 or 5, to a reality game in caves, in a castle, and there was a lot of places that you have to go inside the maze. Anyway, they placed 4 or 5 people waiting, hiding. Okay, just they put them there. That's all. They cannot go. And the young boys have to find them, equipped with a gun. And when they find them, just shoot them in the head. And one of them was slaughtered in front of the camera. And that's part of the game. Everything was high quality, high definition, exactly as you do it in the West, as a reality game. But here, it was just killing for the sake of killing the infidels. So I'm going to show you the online syllabus of one of the biggest Islamic organizations in Canada. It's called ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America. Headquarters in Oakville. Branches in Ontario, in British Columbia.
Can you read us out, because you can't read the subtitle there? What's other family they walk upon? It'd be interesting for people to hear.
Strengthening Canadian family embrace the refugees. Save Family Values Project, Islamic Circle of North America, Canada. With local politicians from Mississauga, yes.
The photo before you asked the question, does ISIS represent Islam? You didn't answer.
I'm answering now, okay? So let's read what ICNA Canada is saying in the online syllabus. The online syllabus is the book Riyad al-Salihin. This is a book with more than 400 hadith. Hadith is narration about the deeds and saying of Prophet Muhammad. And what is interesting here, I'm not referring to the hadith at all, only to the commentary. And this is a commentary that is added and explains, not from the 14th century, but for these days, what the hadiths are saying, okay? So it's not the narration that I'm referring to, only the commentary. How they explain the hadiths. So here you can see, this is they answering Justin Trudeau. Based on the hadith, the political system of Islam is totally incompatible with Western democracy. Clear, simple message. The concept of government party and the opposition is aligned to Islam. All belong to one ummah, nation. Ummah meaning Muslim nation. With only one goal to pursue the same aims and objects of Islamic guidelines. So if you take it and compare it to other Islamic organizations, you can see that the Muslim Brotherhood can also agree on the same principles. And in this case, ISIS, of course, see democracy as heresy. And also Al-Qaeda, and also other organizations. For them, by the way, democracy is like believing in another God, which means that if Jews and Christians who believe in democracy, or take part in the process of democracy, voting, or living in democratic state and being part of the system, are in fact believing in two gods. And then this is shirk. So they are not protected as Ahl Kitab, the people of the book. That means that they become polytheists and then they should be executed. Believers, Muslims, are supposed to swear allegiance to the Caliph. So we have Caliph. Caliph is the supreme authority in Islam. So ISIS also has a Caliph. They're not talking about Canadians, but believers in general. And then again, it refers to democracy. Muslims may respond at once to the call of jihad wherever the need for it arises anywhere. If there is a need for jihad, there is no need for permission from the parents to go to jihad. Which is also, by the way, I saw that also in the case of Hamas and those who went to carry out suicide attack, they don't have to ask the permission of the parents. What is the objective of the jihad? A fight against kufr, against the heresy. And jihad has to continue until this objective is achieved, which is the day of resurrection. So there is no, it's not going to end tomorrow or with a political settlement. And what about Ahl Kitab, the people of the book, Christian and Jews? Jizya. And those who are not, those who do not believe in the oneness of God, the pagans, one choice: embrace Islam or face war. Muslims has to wage jihad against them to wipe out kufr, heresy, and shirk, polytheism, and raise the banner of Tawheed, which is the oneness of God, everywhere. So you can see that basically this is instruction to wage jihad on globally, no compromise till Islam becomes the dominant force in the world. You cannot allow others to think otherwise, this is to believe in anything but Islam and Allah. I'm just quoting, that's exactly a quote from the book. So this is also very interesting what is written here. It's always, when talking about the jihad, inner struggle to correct the behavior of the Muslim, etc. It's always being explained like in this manner. Here in the book, or jihad is only defensive, not offensive. This hadith strongly refutes the people who distort the Islamic concept of jihad and hold that Islam preaches defensive war only. So this is exactly the same message of jihad, of what he said, what is written, just mentioned before, about the objective of the jihad, the uncompromising jihad, and the goal of spreading Islam by force. And the objective of Islam is to purge the world of all these evils. And look here, wherever in the world there is tyranny, ignorance, and heresy, Muslims are bound to fight such evils and finish them by means of jihad. So if there is some, Muslims who read this book like me, okay, so maybe they are taught in the mosque with the same idea, so what conclusion they get from it? We have infidels, we have Muslims, what we should do? We have an objective if we want to be rewarded by Allah. This is our duty. So you see that ISIS, when we are talking about ISIS, it's not just ISIS, we are talking about ideas, we are talking, in some cases, in some attacks, it's ISIS-inspired attacks. What is ISIS-inspired attacks? You can see it here, the same logic and same meaning of jihad. Again, the same idea of jihad. And other chapters in this book talking about killing the Jews, all the Jews. When they will come and Antichrist will appear, the rock and the tree will talk to the Muslims, and they explain the hadith, which is Muslim will dominate the Jews and kill them. In the same syllabus online, you can read it. Talking about stoning the adulterers, chopping off thieves' hands, slave girls. They are dealing also with slave girls. If you can beat her, you cannot beat her, marry her, etc. All these things. And of course, Muslim wife must obey her husband in bed, which may be understood as marital rape. And if you compare it to what the system, the Islamic system that you can find in Saudi Arabia, for example, with the stoning, you see correlation. This is not a new religion. This is Islam. So if we accept that this syllabus, this interpretation of the hadith as presented in this online syllabus by ICNA Canada is correct, so this is Islam. So if this is Islam is being implemented in Saudi Arabia. In variation, very small variation in ISIS, in the Islamic State, in other places. So this is Islam. But not all Muslims accept the authority of the Caliph, because if they accept the authority of the Caliph, give an example, Hamas, the Islamic organization sharing the same ideas exactly. There's no difference. But if Hamas accepts the authority of the Caliph, it becomes part of ISIS. It's not independent anymore. So it's struggle of force. It's not just, you know, a question of a theoretical question of being, you know, supporting of ISIS. No, if you accept the authority, you must implement his teachings. And here you have also another organization in Canada. Its name is Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir, the main issue on his agenda is the caliphate, the Islamic State. And the main goal is to re-establish the caliphate. We need an imam. We need a caliph, to unite us. But it's not only to unite us. It's to give bay'ah, which means to swear allegiance to the Khalifa, which means the Muslims must be under the authority of the Caliph. And the Caliph is not Justin Trudeau. And then they call, the Hizb ut-Tahrir calls on the Muslim army. It's not just talking theoretically about the caliphate. Hizb ut-Tahrir calls on the armies of the Muslims to take actions and to topple the regimes in the Middle East in order to re-establish the caliphate, the true caliphate. Hizb ut-Tahrir does not recognize the Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. They want to establish a different caliphate. But this is the same idea. And read carefully what one of the leaders of Hizb ut-Tahrir said about the relation between Muslim and the Caliph. We are Muslims strong across the planet without anybody who represent us. There's no one represent the Muslims. So you are living here in Canada, you have parties, you have government, you have the mayor, no one represents you. And he explained that. To vote for anybody to become a legislator in such a system is something that Islam forbids. So he does not recognize the democratic system. By the way, there was a heated debate before last elections between two main streams in the Muslim community. One, supported by Hizb ut-Tahrir and other radical imams, they called Muslims not to participate in the voting, and those others who said that each Muslims should vote, not because they accept the democratic system, I'm talking about the imams, but because this is for the benefit of the Muslims. I'm going to, I believe in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to bring on our website, CIJ News, an excellent piece of evidence to that debate within the Muslim community, and everything is all documented. Very interesting to listen to the debate, because that gives you a window to understand the way of thinking in the Muslim community. It does not represent all Muslims, of course, but it gives, another aspect, another angle. And here is the Imam Ahmad Kandil. Ahmad Kandil is a senior Imam in Quebec. He is a member of the Supreme Council of Imam in Quebec. And that's what he said about apostates in one of his sermons in El Rawda Mosque in Montreal. The penalty for apostates. You can read. They be killed, crucified, or their hands and feet be cut off on opposite sides. So you can compare it to ISIS, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, etc. and see that, you know, this is Islam. So chopping off hands is not invention. It's not invented by ISIS. This is Islam. Crucifying people, this is Islam. This is part of Islam. This is the teaching of Islam. You can accept it, you can oppose it, love it, hate it, but you cannot deny it. And another angle of it is, I give you another example from another Imam here from Toronto, Imam Said Rajah, or Said Raga in English. And he's talking about how it's so important for Muslims to live together in one place, not being scattered in different places, Brampton, Sissaga, etc., but in one specific place. And he gives the example of the Sikh in Edmonton, and where, according to him, nothing can be changed or done without the approval of the Sikh community. And he wants to duplicate it here with the Muslims. And we can benefit from this system that they have here. So he's talking basically about segregation, not about integration in society and being part of or blended in society. And if you look into even deeper, that's what he said in December to migrants. I believe it's Syrian migrants that came to Sweden. He didn't say that, but I believe that they are Syrians. And he said to them, you know, young immigrants, and he said that the only reason that you came here to Sweden is to spread Islam. That's why Allah brought you to Sweden. You have to learn the language and then to introduce Islam. So you have a mission. It's not a mission to be blended in society, integrate in society, but spreading Islam, da'wah. And a few years ago, in Toronto, in the mosque called Abu Huraira, he explained his view about integration in society. I will never advertise with a kafir. Kafir, you know, it's unbeliever, infidel. And you can read what he's saying. This is the transcript. If you need a cab, call Muslim. You need a doctor, only Muslim doctor. You need somebody, you know, to do some job, call Muslim. If you want to do anything, just ask if that individual is a Muslim or not. And if he's not, then look for a Muslim. Unbelievable, but that's exactly what he said. Take your vehicle to a Muslim-owned business. If you buy a vehicle, make sure there is a Muslim business or car dealer that sells cars. He also said a few years ago that Harper is an enemy of Islam, justified death penalty for apostates in the University of Waterloo, and also claimed that Muslims did not carry out the Charlie Hebdo and the 9/11 attacks. Of course, they're not Muslims. ISIS is not Islam. They cannot be Muslims. So, if we wrap up all these things, we can see that the threat of ISIS is not just those who are being recruited to ISIS, those who came back, but the ground that make them appear here in Canada, and this is the ideological ground. And you have it also, you have it here, and you can, if you listen to the sermons in the mosques. If you go to the bookstores, or just pick up three books at Danta Square. This is one, this is the new one from Danta Square. It's called the Accepted Dua. The Accepted Dua, the supplications. And it all goes back to the hatred towards the infidels. In many cases, you can hear that the sermon in the mosque end up with a supplication, humiliate the infidels, give us victory over the infidels, help the mujahideen everywhere. Sometimes they mention Palestine, Iraq, Syria. But these are the messages that many people can hear and being exposed to in many occasions. And it's unbelievable that it's also in the street. So if you go to Danta Square, just grab a book and look into it and just read it. This is the message that they give to those who are candidates to join Islam. They're not hiding it. So, and also one of the books is talking about this book, Human Rights in Islam and Common Misconceptions. So if you want to learn about Islam, what is the true Islam, you will find here also the Islamic State and also other things that are mentioned here in the called Human Rights in Islam. But this book is give you, and you see here also the sticker of the Canadian organization. And I'll show you two more examples. This is a book that was purchased in the RIS, Reviving the Islamic Spirit. This is a textbook for grade 10. If you read inside, you will find that it also talks about the Islamic State, the Caliphate. And another book that's being taught in Islamic private schools in Canada. Go to the end of the book and you'll see the teaching of Islam with regard to adultery, stoning, chopping hands, etc. And this is being taught in Canada in private Islamic schools. So the threat of ISIS is the ideology that ISIS represents. The problem is not that ISIS is not an exception in Islam. The ideas of ISIS can be found in other organizations. In Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda. And you can see them also in organizations that are affiliated with these terrorist organizations that are scattered worldwide. And to deal with that, it won't be enough to find the terrorist. I'll give an example. Suppose that here in Canada, we have today 1,000 terrorists, okay? Operative of ISIS. And tomorrow, all of them being rounded up and arrested and in jail. Is the problem over? The answer is no. Why? Because the ideological aspect that can bring more and more operatives, more and more people who sympathize with this idea and ready to take action. So the fight against ISIS should be looking to not just as a war against terrorism, but with the challenge, dealing with the challenge of radical Islam in Canada and worldwide.